I'm going to be giving the mic first and having a whole segment. The first part of this show is going to be dedicated to Amr, who is the founder and leader of the Forward Party of Canada. And yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting conversation because, as you guys probably already know, we're in election season. We're talking politics pretty much every episode these days, and this is a great moment of political change, if I do say so myself. So I think that, stuff regarding politics and stuff like in Canada right now, it's a great time to be talking about politics because there's a lot of pressing issues that we need to deal with as a nation. So, yeah, why don't we jump right into it? The first segment. First of all, I just want Amr, you to maybe introduce yourselves to our audience who don't know you, because I know this is your first time on the show. Why did you start this political party, the Forward Party of Canada? What's wrong with Canada, right? Like, what are the problems that you're trying to fix? Like, I don't want to make it sound like, what's wrong with you, but like, there's a lot of things wrong with this country, right? So like, what do you see is going not correct with this country, and why are the major parties kind of not fit to deal with these the existing parties, I mean, not fit to deal with these issues? What are your goals of this new political party? And lastly, and we'll circle back to this because this is kind of a big topic, but we'll get your opinions on this upcoming election that's coming on April 28th. But before we get to all that, let me just pass the mic to you, and then you can give all of us maybe a quick intro.
I think the first thing you asked is like, what's wrong with Canada, and where do we even start, right? Like, I'm sure you're all feeling it. I'm feeling it. All my friends are feeling it. It feels like there was sort of a cutoff some time ago where if you made it across to the good life, then the Canadian dream worked for you, and if you didn't, you're kind of screwed. And the problem that for me personally was that I did everything right. At least that's what I've been told, right? Like, you go study and a good paying career, get married, moving together, and all of that stuff, and you assume you reach a certain level of income and you start having certain levels of expectations. And when I started looking at my income before I got married, I came to the conclusion that despite being a well-paid software developer, I wouldn't be able to move out by myself. And so accelerated my plans, my wife and my plans to get married and moving together. And part of it was, why spend so much time saving money, like, spending so much and not saving money? So let's do this. But then it just kept eating away at my mind. And I was like, around the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, I was like, whenever I'd look at my paycheck, I'd be like, this is a good paycheck. Where is the problem? And you look it up online and you find out that you're doing not just well, you're doing fantastic in terms of numbers, but your quality of life is nowhere near what you would have expected to be. The average of everything is ridiculous. And so I dug a little bit further, and you find, like, the real estate market. All right, what's wrong with the real estate market? It has become the biggest industry in Canada. Investors are eating it up left and right. It's affecting rents. It's affecting cost of living. It's affecting commercial spaces. So now even businesses are also dealing with that problem. And then I looked, the Liberals failed, so let's see what the Conservatives say. And I was disappointed. Like, they were shouting all of these things about what's wrong with Canada and not really offering solutions. I got hooked into that promises, and then I tried to find what they actually want to do, only to find out it was the same things Harper were doing. And things were bad at Harper's time. Like, if you actually go right now and look up news articles from 2015 before Trudeau's election, and look at what he was campaigning on, it was the exact same problems we're dealing with now. Look at the type of problems our media outlets were sharing. It's the exact same problems. Younger people are having a difficult time raising families, moving out, reaching that milestone. And those who put that milestone off are dealing with even higher rents. So where do we go from here? And then the same, and then I found that the same applied to every single topic I looked into, whether it's homelessness and drug addiction, elections, our public infrastructure, our regulations. They're all fall into the same pattern where the liberals and the conservatives promise the same thing. So who's the alternative in Canada, right? Like you'd say the NDP for a lot of people, but they are basically the liberals light. And who else there is left, right? Like the small parties are very single issue, or extremists, or just average centrists that don't really see the problem that needs to be solved with the same urgency. And so I had the ridiculous idea that, well, this is a democracy, right? If there's nobody offering you what you want, if nobody's living up to your ideals, maybe you should put it out there and, embody them. And that's sort of what got me started about the Forward Party, I guess. And it's been a rocky 2 years since. I had a little bit of a period of time where I was like, is this too ridiculous? And then global news kept happening. Canada's situations kept staying the same, and nobody came up to fill that gap that I still see. And so I was like, maybe I should get back into it. And now here I am pitching it to you guys on this podcast.
Obviously, I have my biased opinions. I think that there's I have told you multiple times before, Amr, we've had conversations back and forth about this, that in my opinion, there is a big solution that's out there that can solve a lot of the financial related issues that you just mentioned. In case you haven't guessed, I'm talking about Bitcoin. But I understand this is maybe like a situation where if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Like as a Bitcoiner, I think everything can be solved with Bitcoin. But I do agree with you to a large extent that it's not going to be a cure-all, right? Like the problems that we face in Canada are in a lot of ways systemic to just like the political system, and we always rotate between these two major parties. We have a de facto two-party system, even though Canadians like to take pride that we're so different than the Americans. The Americans have a two-party system. We have a multi-party parliamentary system, but face it, like there's only been two parties that's rotating, being in charge since forever, right? Like in 2011, the NDP got close, but they didn't get in charge. So yeah. Anyways, thank you for explaining all of that. Now, maybe I just want to share with you my story of how I met Amr. I was just browsing on Twitter, or it's now called X, and I just found his X channel, and I found it really interesting, and I decided to just DM him, and he likes talking about politics. I like talking about politics. We just shoot back and forth random ideas. That huge document that I wrote with the 12-point plan on how I thought Canada could be improved, that was written for the Forward Party of Canada, just because I like to shout into the void, into to hopefully hit some ears that would listen. Even
still keep it. It's not in the void, don't worry. I think it's a lot of good ideas.
Thank you. So yeah, anyways, that's the story of how I got involved with the Forward Party of Canada. And I do think that we need some fresh new energy to kind of break up potentially this two-party system. I know it's a lot, I'm making it sound a lot easier than it actually is, but at least I think we need to make an effort to include fresh new ideas and fresh new political movements that are not these as you said, Amr, fringe parties or one-issue parties, right?
What you refer to is precisely what I would love to see more of in Canada, the spirit of experimentation and of trying new things. There's a few core issues that I am firmly convinced that need to be addressed as soon as possible. And these issues don't require anything too crazy, like the real estate, our real estate situation, our electoral system, our national security, which is finally getting some public attention, our homelessness and drugs crisis, and the state of our public service, and a few more that you can find on the website, like those 10 points that are up there. But then these alone will not fix the core problems that we're dealing with, right? Because you can go out right now and you can see a lot of parties pitching similar ideas. But what it seems many fail to notice is that once we fix these, we have even more fundamental issues we need to address. Our economy is very outdated in many ways, and there's so much new technology out there that has so much potential I didn't even know about. Like, I think to your topic of Bitcoin, I only knew vaguely about what the technology is. I always believed, like, hey, I was one of those guys, like, blockchain has potential, but I don't know about cryptocurrencies. And then by talking to you, I got to learn that, hey, maybe there's actually some fundamental value to Bitcoin. Do I think we should base our entire financial system on it? I still have doubts. But that's the type of debates that we need to be having these days, right? We don't need to be like, well, this is how we've been doing things for the past 50 years. It's clearly good. Let's not change anything about it. But maybe we should. And there's that spirit of, like long-term focus, balance, debate, experiment, like I keep saying about experimentation, this knowledge for the sake of knowledge, and this use of technology. That is something that I would love the Forward Party to stand for. And I believe Canadians need that vision more than ever now.
Yeah, no, totally agreed with you. And I'll put a link to the Forward Party's website and X channel down in today's video description. So if you're an audience member watching, please be sure to check out the official website and X channel of the Forward Party of Canada. I do want to give the other guys some opportunity to kind of chime in. So, Tristan, Sunil, if you two are watching, and if you have questions, now would be the time to, maybe direct some questions to Amr, or if you don't have questions, just general comments on anything that we just talked about.
Well, I mean, okay, here's a tough question that I like to ask people, and I never get an answer. So this is a tough one. And the truth is that, like, a lot of the people in my circle are a lot of, like, center left people, a lot of people who would vote typically for the Liberal Party or NDP. So they are at a stage where they've decided that they can acknowledge that Canada is a big spender and we've got a big budget problem in this country. But whenever I ask them straight up, what would you cut? I never get an answer. So I'll ask you right now, give me 2 programs that you would be willing to cut 100%.
That's a tough question, actually. That's a very tough question.
It is.
I think, you see, I don't know what all the programs out there are, but what I will say, like, the key, in my humble opinion, for what needs to be cut in government is not necessarily the programs themselves, but it's the sheer amount of bloat in many of the departments within government. Like, I live here in Ottawa, and a lot of my friends and a lot of people I know work in the public sector, and even complain about it, right? And so if the bureaucrats think there's so much bureaucracy, and the general public sees the government's fumbling around with all of their funding, the key here may not be to just shutter down an entire program first. The key would be to identify which parts are inefficient. Does that mean reducing workforces? I think that would probably be necessary in a few departments. Are there any social programs that are cut outright right now? I wouldn't promise that, but I promise that we should review them. Like, we should review each program. Is this really necessary? Could this be?
Can I clarify one thing?
Yes.
It doesn't have to be a social program. It can be any program. Anything the Canadian federal government does. It doesn't have to be like a social program like dental care. It could be like the CBC. So that, just to give you more options in your, because saying you're gonna like cut healthcare is a tough question for sure. I don't anticipate anybody would say they would cut healthcare.
No.
So I'm just giving you a little bit of rope. Like, is there anything the federal government does that's like that you would cut 100%?
The problem is, like, one thing I don't want to do is I don't want to commit to something I'm not knowledgeable about, or at least I don't have a good understanding of. This, like, it might sound like I'm trying to dodge your question, but that's genuinely where it's coming from. Is that I cannot say with confidence that I've seen a program and I was like, Yep, that needs to go away entirely. I see, like your point about the CBC, for example. I think we need a publicly funded news organization. We just need it to be extremely neutral. I don't like how the CBC tends to have a bias towards whoever's running the show right now. But I think if we remove public funded news organization, then we'll risk only privately funded media being there, and maybe consolidation of the market. I think that might be risky. For healthcare, I would be against expanding coverage right now. I wouldn't add, like, I'm against the ideas of like dental coverage, let's say. I don't think we have the funds to do so. But I think our big problem is, like I mentioned, like we have so many bureaucrats, it's absurd. I think some comparisons to Germany put us at like 5 to 10 times as many bureaucrats, like healthcare administrators, as they do. So I'll turn it around and ask you, what are some programs you think should be cut 100%? And why? Because I'm not against the idea, I just don't know which programs
Sure.
would be.
I think the CBC should be cut 100% because I don't think that it's really appropriate for the government to have state-sponsored media. I think that I don't think the CBC has really moved the needle in making the quality of Canadians' access to information any better. I don't think Canadians are more well informed than any other people in the world because of the CBC. And I don't think that people who view the CBC who use the CBC as their primary news source are particularly well informed either when compared to other people. So I just don't see the mandate of the CBC to be really any value. And I think that it's actually insulting to have the CBC have one public news organization that is clearly biased towards one party that often funds their programs. So it just doesn't really make sense. I think sometimes you got to just like throw the baby out with the bathwater, and I think the CBC would qualify for that. I think it could probably function on its own by funding itself. I don't see any reason why the Canadian taxpayer should fund such a crappy organization. And that's my own opinion, that it's a crappy organization. So I'm just injecting that into it. Another example of a program I'd cut 100% is job retraining programs. I think these are kind of like very condescending programs that were kind of introduced during globalization to try to convince people that if they signed up for free trade deals that they could retrain 50-year-olds in jobs, but it's actually just throwing money at a problem that doesn't really solve anything. I don't think job retraining is a solution for killing people's jobs through like things like globalization, because it doesn't work. It has never worked. The data has shown that job retraining programs across the Western world have been a complete waste of money, and they've distorted markets, and they haven't resulted in people earning money in other middle class jobs. Generally, when people like retrain themselves, like they leave a corporate job and decide to be a real estate agent or something like that, and then end up becoming successful, they can make a lot of money. But it's not really something where like the government of Canada has retrained its population into being more productive. So I wouldn't really fund job retraining programs. And I think they've been a complete waste of money since they were introduced in the 80s.
Yeah, I think there's this bad habit of assuming that anything that gets lost, if we throw enough money at it, can be fixed. It's the question I always ask myself whenever I see or I hear about such programs is it a matter of the program itself being a failure, or the case of, let's say, political inefficiency getting in the way, right? Like, would have like the job retraining would it have been more effective if it was just funding for educational institutions that made it easier for them to offer courses that the market needs, right? And it's this type of discussion that, like, I can't tell you I have an objective answer or something there, but I'll be very curious, like, if you share with me after. Love to
Sure,
listen.
I can do some Googling for sure on the raw job retraining. It's been a while since I've looked into the issue, but generally anybody who's like looked into it has shown that like when like countries like Canada, the US, and a lot of Western world countries have introduced it, it's just been throwing money at the problem. And just to further your point, I think it's just when you are able to like make an announcement as a government and say we're putting like $2 billion towards something, it just makes it seem like you're doing something, but often you're not doing anything. You're just making an announcement. But I'm taking up a lot of time here, so I'll give Tristan a chance to ask you some questions.
Okay.
But sorry, go on.
Yeah, so before we go to Tristan, I think I have an answer for your original question. I would cut a lot of the subsidies that we pay out to big companies.
That's a good
I
answer,
don't know
actually.
if that's one program, but I think the idea itself needs to be gone.
I think that's an excellent answer. Good job. Good work on that one. That's good answer. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have an explicit question per se. I did want to kind of talk more about like your story, of coming out of university, getting a good job, but then being like, oh wait, I can't afford anything and I'm never going to be able to afford anything kind of vibe. Because I had a very similar experience coming out of university and seeing the housing market and going, oh, it's just not an option. It's just it's not going to be viable. At least in Ontario, which is why I've since moved to Alberta, the where housing is more reasonably priced. But I did think that was a funny, or maybe not funny, but like it's a common spot where I feel like a lot of people are coming out of school and basically finding that exact scenario that you're kind of describing, where you've graduated, you've gotten a good job, you should be able to buy something, but it's just completely unviable. So I can see why that would make you be more inclined to start a party to change that. The one thing that like I do kind of wonder with that kind of approach though is like why your own party rather than try and join a party and change it from within. If there's since let's be real, the liberals and the conservatives basically have a monopoly on parties and on leadership at this point. So maybe that's where I'll go with my question.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, because that is the question everybody I know asks me, like my parents, my friends, my wife, and it's a reasonable thing. And I think what a lot of people are doing. I think there's a lot of more young people joining these parties hoping to change it from within. The issue for me though is that I don't think any of them can change from within. Maybe they can eventually in like 10 years, 20 years, but it would be too late by that point in time. The way I see it, like this is a ticking time bomb, and we're practically in a bubble that nobody is prepared for. I personally anticipate before the next election, we're going to have a financial crisis. And in Canada, that's going to be the real estate market collapsing. Now, my ideal thing is to responsibly pop the bubble, deliberately. But if not that, then at least be prepared for that eventuality. What I've noticed is also that the big problem with a lot of the leadership in big political parties is that they tend to be one generation removed from whatever the current problem is. And they are the ones who have the most power and the most influence in the party. So if they don't see it as a problem, sometimes they just don't act on it. But like the even bigger problem than just that age gap is that I think the major parties are too compromised in a sense. Their own, there was a stat from a few years ago. It was something like 40% of the MPs across all parties, including the NDP, are real estate investors or landlords in some capacity. If the problem that I'm advocating for, like what I'm saying here, is that the biggest problem in Canada's economy is that we're extremely reliant on real estate and extracting rent from our citizens, are we really going to have the members, 40% of the members of parliament, vote against their own interest? I think it's ridiculous that conflict of interest even exists. But how can you move that? And then you factor in that a lot of our biggest companies are involved in that industry. A lot of investor money is like funding a lot of these candidates, a lot of these parties, and then the final cherry on top is that the type of changes that will really address the core of the problem are so deep cutting that no major party is willing to actually go and do that. They would rather offer band-aids, small fixes, this whole idea of like we tweak our system a little bit by a little bit, and then we'll get there eventually. We'll just like power through it. I don't think that's what we need anymore. I think we need to fundamentally reshape how a lot of the country works on a political side. And part of that is the real estate, part of that is the electoral system, and part of that is how we do government in the first place. Like, I do think we're extremely bloated, extremely hierarchical, extremely out of touch with the technologies of the day. All of that needs to be redone. I think our immigration system is always quite horrible, even before the recent uptick in immigration numbers. That also needs to be redone from the ground up. Same goes for our healthcare. And all of these problems, who out there, like how many politicians out there are going to go on and promise such a level of change? I don't see them doing it, and that's why I'm concerned. Like, for example, a recent example, like a while back, even like just a few years ago, one of the top issues that the Liberal caucus was interested in is electoral reform. Yet the party keeps ignoring it time and time again. On the conservative side, there was a big push from within the party to have more citizens and act as advisories to Puliyev, but he still ended up having 50% of his advisors be lobbyists, including a big portion from real estate. And so can we really trust them to do this again, like to do things differently if they're not actually being held accountable for the past? I don't think so.
Yeah, good points. And with that being said, I don't want to like set this up as like a question to make you immediately contradict yourself or anything like that. But the fact is, we have an election coming on April 28th, which is less than a month from now. And I know, like, you've told me about your efforts to, officially get registered and get candidates registered on the ballot and stuff. And I've been trying to help you as much as I can, but unfortunately, I'm not like a Instagram influencer with 100,000 followers or something. So like, there's only so much I can do, right? Like, I signed the I asked you to sign the petition. You asked me to sign the petition to like get registered, and hopefully, like if there's any audience members who are watching, that if you would like to register if you're a Canadian citizen and you like to support the Forward Party, please by all means do so. And you can find the information on the link down below in the description, which I'll link. But I'm assuming that you're probably not going to be able to set everything up by April 28th in time for this upcoming election, because we weren't expecting an election this early. A lot of people were saying that we're going to get pushed all the way till October, but various things happen, and then now we're in election campaign season. So assuming that you're not on the ballot and you can't vote for yourself, you have a decision now to make on April 28th, right? Like, who is I know you just like said all the parties kind of suck in some way, shape, or form, but you have to make a decision, right? Like, April 28th is gonna come, and what do you do? Like, do you stay home and not vote, or do you like kind of pick the least bad option, or like what's and by the way, like, this is a decision that I believe, Tristan, you are struggling with as well, so you're not alone in this struggle. But I just kind of want to get your opinion, Amr, on what your decision will be on April 28th, assuming that you can't, get yourself or get the Forward Party on the ballot by that time.
Yes, that's a very good question. The first thing I'll say is, like, staying home and not voting is absolutely the worst way to protest in a democracy. The absolute worst way. I can't even think of any worse way. Well, maybe I can, but it's the absolute worst way to protest a democracy. Before I get to who I would vote for, I would say that the part of a big part of why we haven't built any more momentum is that I stopped posting, and the Forward Party stopped posting for pretty much the majority of last year. And part of this touches on this little point of doubt. Like, I'll be honest, like, it's a lot of doubts. Am I being too crazy? Am I being ridiculous? Am I not doing the best at work? I wasn't. Figure that out. But once I figured out a lot of personal stuff I sat down with myself and I thought for a bit about how serious am I about this, and why am I so interested in it. I came to the conclusion that not doing anything and only trying to work on like my day job or trying to start a business or any of those things, I came to the conclusion that that's not for me. I really, really want to get into politics, and I want to get it into it the way I believe it should be done. The second question was then, well, there's an election coming up in October. What can I do by then? And is that really the highest priority? And for me, like to touch on the point I mentioned before about the potential for a financial crisis in the next before the over the next 5 years, I think this election doesn't matter. Whether it happened in October or it happened sooner, like as soon as Trudeau stepped down, I had a feeling that they'll run in as soon as possible. But regardless of which outcome it ended up being, I am fairly confident to say that whether it's Carney or Poilievre who ends up running the country, we're going to see more of the same. Fans of the Liberals will say the Liberals will do a little bit better. Fans of the Conservatives will say the Conservatives will do a little bit better. But neither of them have what it takes, or neither of them has the capacity to actually handle a financial crisis. And my biggest concern politically is, where will Canadians go if the establishment parties are unviable in the public imagination? And they tend to go to extremists unless there is a more radical option that is not extreme. And to that end, my dream, if you indulge me for a second, is to be like what Churchill was to the British during World War II, where he was extremely unpopular, like nobody cared about him onto the lead up to World War II because he was a warmonger. He was too scared, too paranoid. But then when it ended up the case that he was right, then he was right there ready to take over and handle things. The UK did not fall to communist or fascist revolutions. Is that where Canada is? I don't think so. I don't think it's that bad, but 5 years is a long amount of time. And if we can be there as the voice of reason that's willing to do things fundamentally differently without ruining people's lives, then that's the position I'd like to occupy in 5 years. So this brings us back to what to do about this election. I think the best use for anybody who's frustrated with the election season or like with the state of our politics in Canada is to not vote strategically. Go out there and genuinely vote for who you think would be the least worst option, even if they're a minor party or an independent candidate. Because at the end of the day, if all of these strategists at each of the big campaigns looks to review the results of the previous election, like in however many years, or the current election, if they look at the results and they found that suddenly there's an uptick of independents getting a lot of votes, or the Greens, or I don't know, whoever else is out there, I think that will send a stronger message than just staying home, and a much stronger message than voting strategically for who you think is more likely to win. Because at the end of the day, the more we vote strategically, the more likely we are to become a literal two-party system instead of a figurative one. And yeah, so that's it. Who will I endorse in my current riding? I will admit I have not looked at who's running in my riding yet. I know that I promised myself I will not vote for Liberal, Conservative, or NDP. If my option ends up being the Greens, I'll go for it. If my option, well, the PPC either. I'm not going to vote for the PPC. I think they're the opposite of what I would love to see. And so I'll just see who's out there. Does it end up being a libertarian candidate? Maybe. Does it end up being an independent who was just frustrated? Maybe. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a good enough answer. And on your point with the strategic voting, I totally agree with you on that, because it's like if everybody strategic votes, that's how we get stuck with like bad options, right? Because like you're just picking a party that you don't that doesn't really represent you, just because you hate another party and you pick a party that's like the party that's in second place that you hate less but doesn't represent you either. Like it creates a mess, and if we all did that, like, we're asking for trouble, right? And just to like kind of back up what I'm saying, we just had an election in Ontario, and I know that I think all of us here, except for Tristan, lives in Ontario. But Tristan, you're from Ontario too, so you know all about Doug Ford. And you guys know I'm not a big fan of Doug Ford. And even though I'm more, I would say, conservative leaning these days, I don't actually believe that Doug Ford's a real conservative. He's a conservative in name only. So I was very dissatisfied with the way that the Ontario progressive conservatives have been running the province. But at the same time, like, we've had liberal Ontario governments before, and they didn't exactly do a great job either. In a lot of aspects, I feel like they did it even worse than Doug Ford. So I didn't really feel comfortable voting liberal either and giving them a second chance. And the NDP, I feel like this is just me personally. They're a little bit too far left for me, even the provincial ones. So I ended up voting for the New Blue Party, which is kind of the up and coming conservative, like true conservative party in Ontario. And I know like people try to like paint the New Blue Party as like, alt-right and stuff like that. If you actually look at what they're standing for, it's like basically politically aligned with the federal conservatives. So that's my opinion. So but the New Blue Party was polling at like, I don't know, 3% in Ontario or something like that. Like, there was no like chance that they were gonna win. And I believe in my writing, there was only like 900 other people that voted for the New Blue candidate in my entire writing. So like they got nowhere close to like even like third place. So but it doesn't matter to me, right? Like, I voted for the party that I feel like represented my views the most, even if they ended up in like fourth place. So that's just me. But yeah, does anybody else have any comments, questions for Amr?
Yeah, this one might be a slightly longer, but I was wondering why you're so convinced that there's going to be a financial crisis in the next 5 years. Is it just the housing market? Because, like, from my perspective on the housing market, we have too few houses for the number of people we have already. So for me, the bubble bursting seems to be something that's not liable to happen very rapidly, just because of the fact that we have more people than we have housing available for at this current stage and into the future, like the foreseeable future, because just of the mismanagement of the immigration system from my perspective. So just based on that, like, is it just the housing, or is there something else? I was just wondering, because you seem pretty convinced on that one.
Yeah, I am fairly convinced on that one. I think it's more of like the housing being like a tumor that's affecting the whole economy, where it's not the fact, I mean, you are correct, like people will always need homes. The problem is that how much money is actually being put in is illogical. We are reaching levels that are pretty close to where Japan was when they had their financial crisis. And it was also not exclusively a problem of real estate, but I think in Canada, we have this issue where the returns, for so long, the returns on investing on a property were so much higher than investing in a business. And that's been true for a couple decades. What we end up with it, and we have a relatively weak economy that on paper looks great. On paper, we have high GDP numbers, even per capita. I know now it's worse, but it's still technically high. But then, does that actually reflect the economic activity being done, or does it just reflect rich people throwing houses in between each other? I think it reflects the second, but it also reflects that a lot of people are getting into bigger and bigger piles of debt just to finance their lives. And so what happens when that starts to reach illogical levels once again. Like we are now hearing about 35 to 40-year-old year-long mortgages. I mean, what's next? Like if it doesn't change, are we going to go for 50 years after? That becomes absurd. And to your point, I am fairly convinced, but I'm open to the idea that I might indeed be wrong, right? If I am wrong and things work out without crisis, I think I'll be happy. I mean, that'll be wonderful. But my worry was and still is, what if I'm right? Right? Like if I'm wrong, things are nice and rosy, but if I'm wrong, I think it will be ugly. And so it's the idea, like the reason the real estate is a central part of what I believe the solution should be, is that ideally we would set up our economy in such a way that any investors fleeing the asset bubble would start investing into other businesses within Canada instead of holding on to cash, or even worse, sending their money abroad. And so it becomes this problem that ties into a lot of other things that then go back and feed the problem. I mean, what major companies did Canada grow in the past decades, 2 decades? We've had quite a few big ones close down. Nortel, I work with one of the multinationals that bought part of their operations. We've had BlackBerry just like completely downsize. And I know we have a few sectors where we are leading, still are, but have we done anything new? Not really. We have Shopify, I guess, but we don't have really anything from the digital age onwards, even though we have a strong tech sector. It all works for the sake of foreign companies. And where does that leave us? I'd say the second problem now that I anticipate might cause a financial crisis is whatever happens down south. It has become so chaotic and unpredictable and there are always indications that the market is a little bit too high. It's the worry now is, if a correction happens, how steep? And given that Canada is so tied up to the American economy in many ways, and we're already seeing the effects right now, what does that do to us? And how do the dominoes fall? That's also a big problem.
Yeah, I had one more question for you. An observation I've made personally, and like kind of a belief I've had, is it seems like around across the Western world, a lot of the center left parties are like just collapsing. They're just becoming very unpopular very quickly. And like to me, it almost seems like center left parties in the Western world will like all collapse completely until they're replaced by new ones. On the other hand, and I do notice there's a lot of like online movements and online activities that are kind of like, what's it called? Like realigning political beliefs. And like, I'm assuming that like post MAGA, which is like realigned political beliefs on like the right wing side, there's likely going to be a realignment on the left wing side. But what I've seen is that most like political movements online don't translate into successful new parties. What ends up happening, what we're seeing in Europe, is that you get like these extremist parties just get hijacked by people. And then like the media will still call them fascist, but they're not real. They got hijacked by like Bitcoiners or somebody else or some group of people. Is there like a model around the world that you're looking at that like is working well? Is there a country in the Western world that's like where there's a new leftist force that you think that like is a good model for Canada? Or do you think that this will happen because like a new leftist parties will rise? Or do you think this will happen because leftists like special interest, like leftist forces online just hijack somebody? Like, how do you think this is going to play out, and what do you think is like something we should be watching in Canada as a model?
I will say I fully agree with you that I do also anticipate the center-left parties to almost all collapse. The more they stay the same. They made a few big mistakes, focusing too much on identity politics and not questioning immigration numbers, for example. But and to your point also, I do agree that like there is this a lot of extremists try to overtake small parties for their own goals. It is something that I have been extremely worried about, even though the odds of the Forward Party becoming big enough to attract such attention is small. It is why I haven't posted on social media for a while, is that I don't feel I'm ready to sell people on a vision that they can get behind. And I think that's gonna be the key. For across the Western world, on the center left, yeah, well, it depends on who you define as center left. I think what we're gonna end up with is we're gonna end up with sort of, even possibly that's also that would require leftists to agree on what they want the left to represent. And there's a very wide range of beliefs that contradict each other.
Are we witnessing a hijacking of a center left party by Bitcoiners right now with the Forward Party?
You see, I don't. From what I've seen, Bitcoiners don't hijack leftist parties. They tend to hijack libertarian or like right-wing parties. Leftists, even though the technology should be like, very, you would think it would be something that a lot of communists and socialists would be interested in. But I guess its association with money automatically puts it in the capitalist class to some people, maybe.
It's the same observation I always made, because like I'm like somebody who's kind of always been like a socialist type thinker. I'm not anymore. I've grown up from those views, but like I was like an NDP type guy, and I was like, why wouldn't you want money? You don't have to manage. Like if you have money, you don't have to manage. You could do whatever you want now. Like you could just get rid of something. But like yeah, the left are insistent on managing everything. Like they really want to control everything. And that was like an eye-opening experience for me as a Bitcoiner trying to talk to leftists.
And I think a big thing that blocks the way of sort of like a Western MAGA equivalent to the leftist parties is that the Soviets kind of like burned a lot of people on the idea on leftist ideals. We didn't really have an equivalent on the right. Now, this might be a point of a disagreement, but I think MAGA is the type of movement that is almost doomed to fail, in my opinion. But it captures the sort of energy and that desire for like deep change that I believe is necessary. And I'm not saying everything they do is wrong. And that's a problem that a lot of leftists fall into. They're so scared of trying to look like the far right that they just end up being the status quo. And that is the most anti-leftist ideal out there, is to maintain the status quo as it is. I saw in the most recent elections in Germany, there was the AfD did pretty well, so that was on the right side, but there was a leftist group, there was a leftist party that did pretty well. It was just kind of on second place in terms of best performers. I think that'll be interesting. What we might see, though, is more along the lines of what Macron's party ended up being. What it isn't truly a leftist party, but it's sort of trying to have like a more radical centrist type of approach, where they have this vision of what they think the country should look like, and they're really committed to getting it done. Yeah, so that's my prediction. I don't think we'll have a leftist MAGA equivalent. I think we'll just have a bunch of fractured parties trying to fill that role.